Welcome to another Ask GMBN Tech, where we get to answer all of your awesome questions which you've used the hashtag Ask GMBN Tech on the comments on any of the videos on our channel. It's very good. And you've got one of the first questions now.
I do. It's from Feedback Zaloop, a regular of ours, who says, question to Raceface, does alu-carbon bonding match prolonged life of steel teeth, or do they follow the Shimano road crankset bonding technique? Now, there's a lot of questions in that one question, I will say. So there's bonding technique, is that strong? Aluminium versus steel, and also, is the era as good as the road crankset bonding technique? So for anyone who doesn't know, the Raceface brought out a chainring called the Era. The new one has a carbon spider and it has stainless steel teeth on the outside. Now, just to clarify, they've used a bonding technique which they say is very similar to how they build skis, so bonding carbon and metal on their blades. And effectively, they said that it's as strong as you possibly could need it on a bike. Your chain will break before this bonding will fail effectively. So I don't think we need to worry about that bonding process. Also, you've mentioned alu-carbon versus steel. Well, actually, the Era is stainless steel teeth, so it should be almost as light as aluminium, but with the strength of steel. And you've also mentioned like the Shimano road cranksets. And most road cranksets, certainly the Shimano Dura Ace crankset or chainring, which has a carbon spider, is bonded to titanium. So that's slightly different metal. And what I'll say, I'll give you some nerdy numbers because we can measure the yield strength of a chain ring in megapascals. So a 7000 series aluminium chain ring will have a 475 megapascals, whereas a grade 5 titanium, which the Shimano Dura-Ace is using, will have 900 megapascals. And the stainless steel, which Raceface are using, is 1300 megapascals. So it's almost twice as much. Well, almost, as the aluminium in terms of yield strength. So will it be as strong? Yes, it certainly seems that way in terms of bonding and in terms of steel versus aluminium. So yeah, hopefully that goes a long way to answering your question.
Great question here from Steve. Oh, not Steve Jobs. There you go.
Steve No Jobs.
Yeah, well, there we go. Do I need to replace my helmet after every crash? Okay, short answer is yes. Even if it's a kind of smaller crash, if your helmet and your head are making contact with the ground, your helmet's doing a job. So even if you can't see any cracks or dents, it will have taken a load and it will have had an impact. So if your helmet has been crashed, then yeah, do check it over thoroughly. If there's any surface scratches, you may find cracks elsewhere in the helmet. So if you've hit it on the left side, the crack might appear on the other side because that's how the forces transfer through how they're absorbed, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's only expanded polystyrene foam, isn't it? And it's there in order to absorb an impact. So if it's had an impact, it might be compromised now and might not take an impact should it happen again. And that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
It's now compromised.
Well, and even if there's kind of like MIPs, some of those can actually be damaged in an impact. So if it's a rotational one, okay, maybe the foam isn't damaged, but you've damaged this kind of slide layer as well. So there's, the idea of a helmet is that it is to be replaced after you crash. And lots of brands do crash replacements where you get a heavily discounted helmet price to buy back one. So it is well worth it.
And also, you know, that helmets are starting from about £30 right now for a really good helmet. So just less features, but the safety is still the same.
Yeah, I think that's key. Yeah, that is really key. You might have less vents, but the protection is same. If you haven't crashed it, there is still sort of a life expectancy. I think it does change from brand to brand. And from experience of being in really hot countries where there's lots of UV light can damage helmets really quickly.
Good point.
But yeah, I think it's that thing of inspecting it, making sure that you're not knocking it while you're riding around, or it's in the back of your car or in the workshop or in your shed or something like that, and it's got additional dents in that it shouldn't have. Most brands, say 3 to 5 years. I feel like quite a lot of brands actually say 3 years. So if your helmet's older than that, it's probably time to replace it. And it sounds like it's excessive to replace a helmet that soon, but yeah, your brain's worth it. You're writing into us, so you've got a good brain. So if your helmet looks battered, it's probably time for replacement.
So my next question from Timo Lotovi, who says, can I put a 44mm offset fork on a frame that has a 42mm offset fork? And what does that even mean? Very good question. So I just want to plug actually our maintenance book, because it does go into detail about the offset on forks. It does explain geometries and forks and components really well as how to maintain them. I do recommend that, so do hit the shop up after this video to check that out. But a short answer is the offset on your fork is that sometimes your wheel isn't directly attached to the bottom of your fork, so there is an effective offset, so there is a distance between your hub and where your forks end. Now the offset can affect the trail. Now trail is something that we can virtually measure if we drew a line down the steering axis or down the forks, and that goes all the way to the ground, and then we drew a line through the center of the hub, and that gives us a measurement or a patch between where the wheel contacts and where the steering axis ends. Now it does sound very complicated, but the long and short of it is when you change that offset, it changes that trail, and that can change the feel of your bike, the way that it steers, how nippy or responsive it may be, or how not nippy and responsive it may be, or sometimes that gives us a more stable feeling bike, similar to how changing your head angle might effectively change how a bike feels up front. So when bike manufacturers make their frames, they want it to have a certain characteristic. They want to build in a certain head tube angle for certain characteristics there. They may want to pair it with certain wheel sizes, and they will then think about the offset and the forks to marry that up with the frame's characteristics as well. So changing the offset, if it was a big change, then you might notice it you might make it more twitchy or more responsive. You might make it the steering slower, but also more stable at speed. And all of these things may be a plus or a negative, depending on what you're trying to get out of your bike. But also the relationship between trail and offset. It has a relationship with the wheel size and the head angle and a lot of other stuff as well. And the relationship, changing 2mm may not seem like much. It might be a lot on your particular bike, depending on what you're running, but you might not notice it at all. Hey, Owen.
I think it's really fun because it's something that we've just started to talk about, but back to those French randonneurs in the 50s, they were already playing with it, and kind of like custom steel builders were already playing with it. And actually Keith Bontrager went on to develop the first suspension forks with Paul Turner. He had custom offsets for his bikes because he preferred a different trail. So yeah, depending on head angle, because it's related to head angle and contact patch and fork length, I feel like there's a whole video that we should do on this in terms of playing with it. But yeah, great question. Hopefully it sort of helps. Okay, we've got a great in-depth question here from Matthew, so I'll just paraphrase it. He wants to know how to align his back wheel on his hardtail. He got a puncture, and then he noticed his rear wheel is really wobbly. So I guess there's a couple of things here. A, if you got your puncture, did you pop the tyre fully on? Has the tyre seated? This isn't a U thing, this is a tyre and bead combination. So check the tyre bead, go all the way around one side, check that it's all the same kind of position, check the other side, spin the wheel and check if it's the tyre bumping around versus the rim.
There's usually a real line that you can follow around the tyre that matches up with the line of the rim, so you'll know whether it's seated properly or not.
The next thing is, quick releases. I've done it on my own bike with the quick release on the back. It's really easy to think, oh no, my frame's out of alignment, my wheel's not aligned properly. But actually you just need to open that quick release up, make sure that nothing's interfering with it. Maybe if it's upright, that's normally easier to set up. Push down on the saddle so you've got even tension on either side of the wheel, and then do up the quick release. Double check then to see if everything's aligned. And if you've still got something misaligned and your wheel's wobbling, it sounds like it needs a true, which is something you can do at home. We've got videos on it. But I think it's one of those tasks where it's very easy, and I'm speaking from experience, to get in a real puzzle very quickly. And I say puzzle, you can write off a wheel really quickly. So if you've got any kind of concerns about how you use a spoke key, by all means watch the video, get informed as you can. But yeah, bike shops are often really good at helping true a not too bad out of true wheel. Whereas if you go with a kind of pretty much written off wheel because you've tried to tour it at home, it gets very expensive very quickly. So yeah, make friends with your local bike shop and they can help. But yeah, ask us more questions. We're here to help.
My question from Kanta Apumai, who says, hey GMBN Tech, I have a problem with my hub. I have a SRAM-Rise 60 carbon 29 wheel set, the rear hub. Whenever I keep the cassette facing downwards, the cassette falls off with the freehub body. I'm wondering if there is any clever ways to solve this. Yeah, some freehub bodies just come off really easily, and especially when you turn that wheel upside down, the weight of the cassette will just pull it off. Now, this isn't a problem. This doesn't mean that it's faulty or anything. Some hubs have better end caps than others. There might be some kind of rubber seal that often holds it into place. So do check to see if you've got an explode diagram in your manual perhaps that says maybe you should have a seal that keeps things on. But if it doesn't, it's not a problem. It shouldn't make any difference to your wheel once it's in the actual frame and all torqued up properly. It won't fall out. It's just really annoying when you take your back wheel out and it falls off. So unfortunately, that just might be the style of your hub, and you're just going to have to be careful when you take your rear wheel out. Sorry.
Great question here from Dan Buckman. He's got an older Specialised S-works M5 hardtail with 26-inch wheels. He's got Hope Pro 2 hubs, very nice hubs. He wants to know if he can upgrade to 275 wheels. Would he need different hubs? Can he use the existing hubs he's got? Will there be any issues with chainstay length? He's running a nuke-proof carbon fork. Will he have to update that? All great questions. We'll start with the hubs. Okay, so with your hubs, the sizing that they are fits the frame, and they'll have a set spoke count. There might be 28, there might be 32. So the hubs can stay, so that's fine, because they're matched to the frame and they're matched to the fork. Depending on what rims you fit, and that's a slightly separate question, they'll have to match the same spoke count. So if you've got 28 hole spokes in your hub and you've got a 28 hole rim, they have to match. You can't, well, okay, there's some mats where you can do it, where you can match it cleverly, but for this one, match the spoke count on the hubs to the rims. The rims, I guess, is then the next question, because you need to know how much room you've got. The rigid carbon nuke-proof fork, I think, is from about 2008, and I'm going to say you will have clearance, because they were suspension corrected for either sort of like 80 to 100 mil fork. So that's the axle to crown, that's the clearance that you require. A 26-inch wheel is around 26 inches. 275 wheel isn't actually 275, it's a little bit smaller in outside diameter, so I'm very confident that it will fit. Now, the rear wheel, that's more challenging. And it's challenging not because of what you think of as chainstay length, because whilst that is a factor, realistically, the chainstays will be probably long enough to fit a 275 rear wheel. The problem that you will have is tyre width and where the width and the shaping of those chainstays sits, potentially even seat stays too. Depending on if you've got a little brace, you might have issues there, because effectively you're moving that kind of bulgy bit of tyre much further forward. So you're right to think it is a chainstay issue, but it's also the chainstay shape. So it's really tricky in terms of what stuff you need to update. And I think probably the only way to do it is to borrow somebody else's wheels. Okay, they might have different axles, but you can use it close enough to get close enough, but physically fit the wheels in. On the front, I'm fairly confident you'd be able to fit one in. So yeah, there isn't a hard and fast sort of ruling of like, it will fit. There are some measuring tools that frame builders use to show and guide people of certain tyre sizes for certain rim widths and all of those kind of like calculation conundrums. But it's tricky. I guess the other factors is that you're going to change how the bike rides quite a lot, because you're going to lift where the axles are up by a little bit. You're also going to raise the bottom bracket. And as we've kind of talked about previously, if you change the axle to crown and you change effectively the head angle, you're going to change the trail and you're going to change how the bike steers, literally. So that contact patch is going to be in a different place. So the handling will be different. If you only replace the front, it's sort of going to make it a bit slacker, but you're raising the front up, so you're going to raise the bottom bracket. So yeah, I'm not being able to answer it concisely. Effectively, potentially yes, but you're going to have to do some faffing.
I think, yeah, it's really good points. I think there's a slight rule of thumb of trying to get 25mm of clearance around your tyre. So do check that if you're borrowing anyone's wheels to try and see if this works out. But for now, that's all we've got time for. But if you have any burning questions right now, then use hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments right now, or check out that wheel truing video that I did earlier if you want to see how to make a wobbly wheel not wobbly anymore.